The Devil's Bible, also formerly known as the Codex Gigas, is the largest illuminated manuscript that we have on record.
For centuries, the Codex Gigas has sat in libraries, hiding its secrets behind dense medieval Latin and deteriorating pages. Scholars have chipped away at it for generations, but the sheer scale made complete understanding nearly impossible.
This is the Gigas Codex. A monk wrote this in a single night. He couldn't do it. It's an impossible task.
Now, artificial intelligence has accomplished what hundreds of years of human effort couldn't, and the newly revealed passages contain some truly unsettling content that medieval monks thought important enough to preserve in the largest manuscript ever created.
This is one of the strangest books. Its origins are covered in mystery. This book was known as one of the 7 wonders of the world.
What is the Codex Gigas? Picture a book so massive that it takes 2 people to lift it. The Codex Gigas measures about 36 inches tall, 20 inches wide, and weighs roughly 165 pounds. It's not just big for a book, it's architecturally absurd, containing 310 parchment pages that required the skins of 160 animals to produce.
It's got 310 sheets of vellum, which may not contain all those texts, but of course they're very large.
This thing was created in the early 13th century, around 1229, in a Benedictine monastery in Bohemia, which is now part of the Czech Republic. The legend surrounding its creation is almost as disturbing as its contents. According to medieval sources, a monk broke his monastic vows and was sentenced to be walled up alive as punishment. Desperate to save himself, he promised to create a book that would glorify the monastery forever, containing all human knowledge, and he completed in a single night. As midnight approached and he realized the task was impossible, he made a prayer. But not to God. He prayed to Satan for help finishing the manuscript. The devil agreed, and in exchange for his soul, completed the book before dawn. To seal the deal, the monk included a full-page portrait of his dark benefactor. Now, that's obviously a legend. The actual handwriting analysis shows remarkable consistency, suggesting a single scribe, but the work would have taken between 25 to 30 years of dedicated effort. Still, that a single person created this entire thing is extraordinary in itself. The monastery where it was made, Podlagis, was later destroyed, and the manuscript changed hands several times before landing in Sweden during the 30 Years' War in 1648, where it remains today at the National Library in Stockholm.
This is an amazing book. This is the highlight of Sweden right here.
The infamous Portrait of Satan. Turn to page 577, and you'll understand immediately why this book earned its nickname. There, taking up an entire page, is a portrait of the devil that has unsettled viewers for 8 centuries. This isn't some cartoonish red figure with a pitchfork. The image shows a massive, greenish creature with a red-lined interior, sitting in a crouched position. The figure has clawed hands and feet, a grotesque face with a long red tongue sticking out, and 2 strange protrusions from its head that could be horns, towers, or something else entirely. What makes this portrait particularly disturbing is its naked vulnerability combined with obvious power. The devil isn't portrayed as beautiful or tempting, which was common in some medieval art. This is a raw, bestial representation that's meant to repel and frighten. The green color was unusual for devil depictions at the time. Most were rendered in red or black. Some scholars think the green might represent disease, corruption, or the unnatural. The page opposite the devil portrait originally contained an image of the heavenly city, creating a stark contrast between damnation and salvation. However, that page is now lost, leaving the devil to dominate alone without its counterbalance. Medieval viewers would have seen this as deeply significant symbolism. The detail work is remarkably precise for such a large illustration, with careful attention to the anatomical features and shading that makes the figure appear almost 3-dimensional on the page. Artists and historians have studied this image extensively because it represents one of the most striking devil portraits from medieval manuscripts. Unlike many religious texts where demonic imagery was small or symbolic, the Codex Gigas gave Satan a full page, the same honor typically reserved only for the most important biblical scenes. What's actually inside this book? Here's where things get interesting beyond just the scary picture. The Codex Gigas isn't just a Bible, though it does contain the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, both Old and New Testaments. But that's just the starting point. The manuscript is essentially a medieval encyclopedia, cramming together religious texts, historical chronicles, medical formulas, magic spells, and practical reference materials all in one place. After the biblical books, you'll find Flavius Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews and his account of the Jewish War, which were crucial historical texts about ancient Judaism and early Christianity. Then there's the Chronicle of Bohemia by Cosmas of Prague, giving us historical insight into Czech lands during the medieval period. The book includes Isidore of Seville's Encyclopedia, which was basically Wikipedia for medieval monks, covering everything from theology to natural science as understood in that era. But it gets stranger. Buried within these pages are medical formulas and remedies, many involving herbs and substances that would have been common in medieval monasteries. There are also exorcism rituals, specific instructions for casting out demons, and protective charms meant to ward off evil spirits. This wasn't unusual for the time. Monasteries served as medical centers, and monks were expected to deal with both physical and spiritual ailments. Then there are the missing pages. 8 pages were removed from the manuscript at some point, leaving only stubs. No one knows what was on them, though their location in the book, right where the monastic rules would have been detailed, suggests they might have contained something controversial or compromising about the monastery itself. Theories range from mundane, embarrassing content to additional dark rituals that later custodians deemed too dangerous to preserve. Why was it so hard to translate? You might think Latin is Latin, and any decent scholar could work through it. Not quite. Medieval Latin differed significantly from classical Latin, with regional variations, abbreviations, and specialized vocabulary that changed depending on the subject matter. The Codex Gigas switches between religious Latin, medical Latin, historical Latin, and what appears to be more colloquial expressions, all written in a 13th century Bohemian style. The handwriting presents its own challenges. While remarkably consistent for a single scribe working over decades, it uses medieval conventions that modern readers find difficult. Letters were abbreviated in ways that required contextual knowledge to expand properly. Certain letter combinations looked nearly identical, and the lack of standardized spelling meant the same word might appear several different ways across the manuscript. Then there's the sheer volume. At roughly 600 pages of dense Latin text with multiple columns per page and minimal spacing, you're looking at the equivalent of several modern books. Previous translation efforts focused on specific sections, particularly the biblical portions, since those could be cross-referenced with known texts. The historical chronicles received some attention, as did the medical formulas, but comprehensive translation of the entire manuscript proved practically impossible given the time and expertise required. Environmental damage has also taken its toll. Some sections have faded, been stained, or suffered water damage over the centuries. Certain pages are harder to read than others, requiring special lighting and magnification. Until recently, scholars had to work with the physical manuscript or basic photographs, limiting their ability to enhance and analyze difficult passages. How AI changed everything. Modern machine learning models have revolutionized how we approach historical texts. Unlike earlier computer translation attempts that relied on simple word-by-word replacement, current AI systems can understand context, recognize patterns across massive data sets, and make educated inferences about unclear passages based on probability and linguistic structure. The breakthrough came from combining several technologies. Optical character recognition systems trained specifically on medieval manuscripts could now identify handwritten Latin characters with high accuracy, even when faded or damaged. These systems learned from thousands of digitized medieval documents, understanding common abbreviations and letter variations. Once the text was digitized into machine-readable format, translation models trained on vast corpuses of Latin texts, both medieval and classical, could process it.
Digitization can be a pretty taxing process on the book itself. You have to be very careful not to damage the book in any way.
Research teams, including those at the National Library of Sweden and various universities, collaborated on digitizing the entire Codex Gigas in ultra-high resolution. These images allowed AI systems to analyze the text at levels of detail impossible for human eyes, detecting faint traces of ink and reconstructing damaged sections by comparing letter patterns throughout the manuscript. The AI translation process involved multiple passes. First, basic translation of straightforward passages established baseline accuracy. Then more complex sections were processed, with the AI drawing on context from surrounding text and similar passages elsewhere in the manuscript. For particularly difficult sections, the system generated multiple possible translations, which human experts could evaluate. This hybrid approach combined AI's processing power and pattern recognition with human expertise in medieval culture and language nuance. What took human scholars years to partially complete, AI accomplished in months with the entire manuscript. More importantly, the AI could cross-reference all sections simultaneously, identifying patterns and connections that researchers working on isolated passages would never notice. The system found repeated phrases, tracked how certain terms were used in different contexts, and even identified sections that seemed to quote or reference each other across hundreds of pages. What the new translation reveals. The newly completed translation has confirmed some suspicions while revealing unexpected content. The medical sections contain remedies that range from surprisingly reasonable herbal treatments to disturbing practices involving animal parts and bodily fluids. Some formulas for treating fever and infection actually align with modern understanding of how certain plants have antibacterial properties. Others recommend procedures that would have been actively harmful, like bloodletting, taken to dangerous extremes, or compounds containing toxic substances. The exorcism rituals are far more detailed than previously understood. Earlier partial translations captured the basic structure, but the complete text reveals specific procedures for different types of possession, protective circles with particular geometric requirements, and invocations that blend Christian prayers with older, possibly pagan elements. These weren't simple, the power of Christ compels you moments. These were elaborate multi-day rituals requiring specific materials, timing, and preparation. Historical passages, now fully translated, provide detailed accounts of political intrigue, wars, and social conditions in medieval Bohemia that fill gaps in our understanding of the period. Some chronicles describe events that weren't well documented elsewhere, including local conflicts, natural disasters, and disease outbreaks. There are also surprisingly candid observations about church politics and corruption that would have been controversial to write down. More intriguing are sections that appear to be personal notes or observations by the scribe himself. These weren't meant as formal text, but seemed to be margins where he recorded thoughts, questions, or commentary on what he was copying. Some of these notes express doubt about certain church teachings, curiosity about natural phenomena, and what appears to be genuine fear about spiritual matters he was documenting. The astronomical and cosmological sections reveal how medieval monks understood the universe, with detailed diagrams of celestial movements and theories about the structure of heaven and hell that show sophisticated mathematical thinking mixed with theological assumptions. They didn't just blindly accept church doctrine. They were actively trying to figure out how the physical and spiritual worlds connected. The terrifying parts. No one expected. Here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. Certain passages describe encounters with demonic entities in clinical, almost scientific detail. These aren't fire and brimstone sermons about abstract evil. They read more like field reports, describing physical manifestations, behaviors, and effects of what the writers believed were actual demons. The level of specificity is disturbing because it's written as observed fact, not theological speculation. One section details signs of demonic presence in monastery settings, describing phenomena like sudden temperature drops, objects moving, and specific patterns of behavior in affected individuals. Whether these describe actual events interpreted through a medieval lens or represent something else entirely is unclear, but the matter-of-fact documentation is chilling. The writer describes protective measures that were apparently tested and refined, suggesting ongoing problems that required solutions. The medical sections contain procedures for treating what was called demonic illness, which probably included epilepsy, mental illness, and other conditions they didn't understand. Some treatments were relatively benign, like prayer and isolation. Others involved restraints, starvation, and physical punishment meant to make the body inhospitable to demons. Reading detailed instructions for these procedures, written as standard medical practice, reminds us how recently we've understood human psychology and neurology. Perhaps most disturbing are sections that discuss the nature of evil in ways that feel uncomfortable even now. Medieval monks spent enormous mental energy categorizing types of sin, levels of damnation, and hierarchies of demons. The Codex Gigas contains detailed classifications of demonic entities, their supposed abilities, and how they interact with the human world. This isn't presented as mythology or symbolic teaching. It's presented as practical information for people who genuinely believe they might encounter these things. There are also passages describing visions and spiritual experiences that border on hallucinatory. Whether these resulted from religious ecstasy, sleep deprivation, fasting, or possibly ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, they're documented with disturbing intensity. The writers describe seeing angels and demons in physical space, experiencing what they interpreted as spiritual warfare, and receiving messages they believed came from beyond the mortal world. The Codex Gigas stands as a window into minds that understood reality completely differently than we do. The AI translation hasn't just given us words, it's revealed the medieval worldview in comprehensive detail. These monks lived in a universe where demons were as real as disease, where spiritual forces directly influenced daily life, and where the boundary between the natural and supernatural barely existed. Reading their detailed, systematic documentation of this worldview is like discovering an alien civilization that happened to exist in our own past. The book they created remains as mysterious and unsettling as the legend that surrounds it, and now we can finally read what they thought was important enough to spend a lifetime preserving.